All right, we will get started, and we will start with roll call. Denise, can you please call the roll?
Rachel Wise.
Here.
Lily Larson.
Present.
Glenn Flint.
Here.
John Witzel.
Here.
Molly O'Halloran.
Present.
Patricia Tim.
Yes.
Maureen Nichols.
Here.
Patrick McPherson.
Present.
Commissioner Bloomstead.
Present.
All present.
Thank you. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted on the east wall of this room on the south side of the door. Live web streaming will be available through the State Board of Education website, www.education.ne.gov/stateboard. Excuse me. Board members, please remember to turn on your microphones before speaking and to turn them off when you are finished. Please turn off any personal cell phones. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the February 4th through 5th, 2016 meeting?
Make the motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, Denise, please call the roll.
Patrick McPherson.
Yes.
Maureen Nichols.
Yes.
Patricia Tim.
Abstain.
Molly O'Halloran.
Yes.
John Witzel.
Yes.
Glenn Flint.
Yes.
Lily Larson.
Yes.
Rachel Wise.
Yes.
7 yes, 1 abstain.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Commissioner, are there any recommended changes for today's agenda?
No, we don't have any changes for the agenda.
All right, is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to approve today's agenda. Is there any questions or comments?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. I expected to see, given the 250 emails I received from constituents, I expected to see several busloads of folks here this morning, and I was willing to move the discussion on that item up, but seeing that the turnout is not what we expected, I'm not going to do that.
All right, any other comments or questions? Hearing none, Denise, please call the roll.
John Witzel.
Yes.
Glenn Flint.
Yes.
Lily Larson.
Yes.
Rachel Wise.
Yes.
Molly O'Halloran.
Yes.
Patricia Tim.
Yes.
Maureen Nichols.
Yes.
Patrick McPherson.
Yes.
8 yes.
Thank you. Next, we will move on to our public comment period. Thanks to the members of the public who are here today. We have had 2 special requests for appearance that were granted 10 minutes each. After those, we will move into 2 requests that are 5-minute in our general public comment period. Our first request for special appearance is from Henry Burke. Henry Burke has requested and been granted a special appearance to comment. Good morning, Mr. Burke.
Good morning.
And you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Henry Burke. I would like to discuss federal money and federal control of Nebraska schools. Before I get started, I should mention that today is National Grammar Day. I kind of hopes I ain't gonna use lots of crummy grammar when I tells you where the federal control is at. Let's look at education funding in this country. On the national level, the federal government provides $54 billion out of the $598 billion total education revenue. This means the federal government picks up only 9% of the total education tab. The remaining 91% is paid by state and local sources. Let's focus on Nebraska and how the schools are funded in this state. Nebraska schools receive $366 million from the federal government, $1.2 billion from the state of Nebraska, and $2.2 billion from local sources. Total revenue for Nebraska was $3.8 billion. The federal government likes to threaten to withhold Title I funds from the states. How much money is involved? Nebraska received $91 million from Title I, $80 million for special education, $76 million for child nutrition, and $3 million for vocational programs. Now let's look at the percentages. In Nebraska, the federal government provides only 9.6% of the total education funding. The state of Nebraska provides 32% of the education funds, and the local government picks up the lion's share at 58% of the total education revenue. Even though the federal government provides only 9% of the education funding, it exercises tremendous control over the schools in this country. Because we are Nebraskans, we should concentrate on how the federal government controls the schools in our state. I've said many times that our state standards should be strong Type 1 standards. To be exemplary Type 1 standards, they must be explicit, knowledge-based, academic, clearly worded, grade-level specific, and measurable. Unfortunately, our existing Nebraska standards in the 4 core subject areas of math, English, science, and social studies are Type 2 standards. Common Core standards, as well as school to work, outcome-based education, C-scope, are examples of Type 2 standards. Because of the strong grassroots opposition to the Common Core standards in Nebraska, the Nebraska Department of Education, NDE, will probably not overtly adopt Common Core. However, the NDE might attempt to sneak it in under a different name. Loosely worded, generic, non-grade level specific state standards, which are not measurable, are an open invitation for Common Core. Already, several Nebraska school districts are using Common Core math and English textbooks. Federal control over education comes in many forms, and some of the forms are quite subtle. Data mining is a prime example of that subtle, hidden control. Under agreements that every state signed to get stimulus funds, the states must share students' academic data with the federal government. The State Longitudinal Data System, SLDS, is very pervasive and intrusive. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, known as FERPA, formerly protected highly personal psychological and biological information. Parents and teachers may think that privacy laws protect them, but the Obama administration reinterpreted those privacy laws in 2011. Some of the intrusive items include healthcare history, disciplinary record, family income range, family voting status, religious affiliation, fingerprints, retina and iris scans, voice prints, DNA, sequence, facial characteristics, and handwriting. The federal government's U.S. Department of Education will track a student's personal records from cradle to grave. Unlike a minor's criminal records, the student data lasts forever. Here's the troubling thing. Data mining is not limited to our children. During a congressional hearing in November, it was revealed that about half of the population of the United States have their personal data sitting on the vulnerable, insecure U.S. Department of Education database. On December 10th, 2015, Obama signed into law Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. ESSA is a rewrite of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and the No Child Left Behind law. Under the new ESSA law, states will be forced to use Common Core. The new law all but guarantees that Common Core will likely remain in place for many years for most states. Non-Common Core states like Nebraska and Texas will come under increased pressure to use Common Core. Some of you may have read the recent letter from Ann Whalen, a senior advisor to the Secretary of Education in the U.S. Department of Education. The reminder letter was sent to all chief state school officers on December 22nd, 2015. I would like to spend a few minutes on the outstanding response written by Judge A.J. Wagner. Judge Wagner sits on the Ohio State Board of Education, but wrote this widely distributed letter as a personal response to Ms. Whalen's letter. Point by point, Judge Wagner carefully rebuts Ms. Whalen and the federal mandates in the new ESSA law. Judge Wagner begins by slamming the U.S. education official on the 95% rule. He stated, For instance, you demand adherence to the rule that 95% of students be tested for English and math from grades 3 to 12. Yet the newly passed Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, gives states the authority to affirm parents' right to opt their children out of the tests. Judge A.J. Wagner addresses the administration's testing action plan in considerable detail. Under Worth Taking, Judge Wagner points out that good assessments should be, number one, aligned to the content a student is learning, present useful information, provide additional feedback to students and teachers, aid decisions on resources, and happen only when necessary to accomplish those goals. No standardized test should ever be given solely for educator evaluation. Judge Wagner suggested this practical limit on testing time. States should place a cap on the percentage of instructional time students spend on statewide standardized assessments. A student should not spend more than 2% of her time taking these tests. I think most of you would agree that 2% is a reasonable testing time. Judge Wagner offered this great analogy. Schools are not football teams that should be evaluated on win-loss records with a team of chosen athletes. Schools don't choose their students. They take them as they come and must do the best they can with them. Testing pressures prevent that from happening as the focus of the classroom moves away from instruction to tests. A.J. Wagner makes this interesting observation about teachers in high poverty schools. By evaluating those who teach impoverished kids based on their students' ability to test, we have come to a point where we do not have enough teachers to work in schools with high rates of poverty. I have seen and heard of excellent teachers who have moved to higher performing schools not because they were bad teachers, but because they were good teachers constantly evaluated as being bad. Thus, many of our poorest schools cannot find teachers to fill urgent vacancies. I strongly urge you to read Judge A.J. Wagner's full response letter to pick up additional gems of wisdom. In conclusion, overall, the federal government provides only 9.1% of the total U.S. education bill. The federal government provides 9.6% of the education funding for Nebraska. By contributing only 9% of the total education funding, the federal government exercises tremendous control over our schools. Nebraska's poor Type 2 standards have opened the door for Common Core instructional materials in Nebraska schools. Under the new ESSA law, Nebraska will be forced into Common Core. Nebraska students and parents are susceptible to intrusive data mining under the state longitudinal data system. Ohio State Board member A.J. Wagner has produced an insightful response to the top official at the U.S. Department of Education. I hope all of you will read Judge Wagner's letter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Burke.
Mr. Burke, will you email your report to me, please?
Yes, I have emailed that to all the
Okay,
board members.
thank you.
In fact, I sent to both of your addresses.
Thank you.
Next, we'll move on to the next request. Sherry Rickard has requested and been granted a special appearance to comment. Good morning. You will have 10 minutes.
Good morning, everyone, again. My name is Sherry Rickert, and I'm the Policy Director, General Counsel for the Nebraska Catholic Conference. And again, I thank you for giving me the time to speak about the textbook loan program, which we will be considering later at this meeting pursuant to the petition for a rules change submitted by the conference at your January meeting. As I'm sure you know from reading the petition, it proposes amending the current definition of textbook in the regulations for the textbook loan program. The proposed definition would allow private school students to access the same educational resources as the local school board is providing to individual public school students in the same district. In addition to being fair and equitable, this amendment would allow the textbook loan program to advance with future developments in education innovations, without the need to revisit the definition every few years. I would refer you to my prior comments about this issue before this board and have copies available if you would like to read them again. A fair reading of the pertinent statutory provision, Nebraska Revised Statute Section 79-734, Paragraph 2, clearly indicates that private school students are to receive the same educational resources that public school students in the same district are receiving, to the extent the legislature appropriates funding for that specific purpose. At the time this provision was enacted, educational resources for individual students consisted of hardbound textbooks that were loaned and reused for a number of years, and so the legislature used that terminology in referencing what school boards had to provide both public and private school students. However, the format and delivery systems for educational resources are changing dramatically. Public school students are receiving new educational resources that increasingly are supplementing or replacing the traditional textbook. But the Department of Education has been insisting that the term textbook be ossified for private school students under the textbook loan program. If the department were supportive or even just accepting of the principle underlying the statute for the textbook loan program, our request to update the program should have led to a relatively straightforward and collaborative discussion, resulting in agreement within a reasonable period of time as to the best legal means to achieve that goal. But the response to the conference's efforts over the past year has been anything but straightforward and cooperative. In our initial meetings with the commissioner and his staff, the conference was advised that the textbook loan program would have to quote-unquote hobble along until an education technology initiative that would benefit all Nebraska students could be established. No, there was no assurance that the obstacles facing that initiative, including whether school boards would be willing to surrender local control over curriculum, can be overcome. No, there was no established time frame as to when it might be operative. No, our Catholic school superintendents were not being informed about details related to this initiative. And, most importantly, no, private school children would no longer receive the financial benefit of the textbook loan program under this initiative when it would be established. We were wondering why the commissioner, as well as some board members, were insisting that talking about this technological education technology initiative when we had asked to meet about updating the textbook loan program. And we insisted, for our part, that the textbook loan program should be addressed separately from the education technology initiative. Following those meetings, we attempted to communicate with department staff about technical legal issues that had been raised in relation to any update of the program. The answers that we received, if not outright erroneous, were framed in a manner that was not conducive to achieving a resolution of the issue. And most recently, the board proposed legislation to the Unicameral's Education Committee that would insert a definition of textbook into Section 79-734-2 that is poorly drafted and legally ambiguous, and that would exclude, not include, at least some new formats for educational materials that even currently are given to public school students. One plausible explanation for these difficulties was presented in the fiscal note attached to LB 1026, legislation that was introduced to help further the department's education technology initiative on January 19th of this year. The fiscal note from the legislative fiscal analyst indicates that the department has been denied requests for federal and state funding related to the initiative, including nearly $30 million in requests from Nebraska's general funds from FY 2015 to 2017. The department's fiscal note to LB 1026, which follows that of the legislative fiscal analyst, describes how the department is seeking to identify activities that occur, quote, in isolation at NDE and elsewhere as, quote, sources to implement the initiative presented in LB 1026. The, quote, initial identification of current expenditures that could be considered for integration include textbook loan, and it cites the nearly $500,000 that's used for that program. One would logically infer that the department, unable to convince the legislature to support its education technology initiative with general funds, is looking to divert other resources, and in particular, the textbook loan program funding, for this purpose. The department's lack of support for the textbook loan program is further evidenced by its inclusion of the program in the department's budget modification proposals for FY 2015-16 and FY 2016-17. I should note that this was back in November of 2014. The relatively minuscule amount of funding, $465,500, for the textbook loan program was targeted for elimination by the department in the event the agency's general fund appropriation was less than the total budget request. The department's total budget request for FY 2015-16, just as a matter of comparison, was over $1.6 billion. The conference has heard that the Education Committee is considering replacing the textbook amendment currently in LB 1066 with a provision calling on the department to devise a new definition for purposes of the textbook loan program within the coming months. Perhaps NDE staff will provide more details later at this meeting. But if that is the case, the conference is concerned about the likely outcome. Given the difficulties we have encountered so far, we are not optimistic that a definition will be presented by the department that ensures private school children will both receive equitable access to educational resources and the benefit of appropriations which currently are directed to the textbook loan program. The definition proposed in the petition before you today would accomplish that goal. Department officials and some board members have indicated that a statutory amendment is necessary. They have not explained why that's the case, given that in 2008 the department was able to amend the definition of textbook in the regulations, including by adding electronic media. The statute has not changed since then. In fact, the only thing that seems to have changed is the department's need for funding for its Education Resources Initiative. Once again, we would consider that a separate issue. Any decision about the integration of the textbook loan program into such an initiative should be undertaken only after there is sufficient information available as to whether and how such an initiative would benefit private school children. Then the relevant stakeholders should be consulted and agree to such an integration. That process needs to be undertaken separately from the current and urgent need to update what constitutes a textbook under the textbook loan program. Therefore, I urge you to approve the petition for a rules change that you will be considering later this morning. I would just add that in reference to Mr. McPherson's comment about expecting more private school parents to attend this meeting, I was notified by a number of parents that they wish to attend, but given that it's a weekday morning, it was difficult to get off work or to arrange proper child care to be able to be here. But as he noted, the number of emails that he received, this is an important issue for our Catholic school parents, and they will be looking forward to seeing the outcome of the vote on the petition. Once again, I thank you very much for your consideration and your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Rickert. We will now move into our regular public comment period. I'd like to remind people to make sure they have signed in if they have not already done so. There are cards on the table outside this room. The first person that we have is Jessica Cluck. Is it Cluck? Good morning.
Good morning.
Ms. Cluck, please. You will have 5 minutes.
I won't take 5 minutes because I'm not really a public speaking person.
That's all right.
I'm Jessica Cluck. I am a parent of 6 children. Currently 5 of them go to school at St. John the Apostle School here in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I wanted to speak to you to urge you to consider this petition for the rules change. This is a huge benefit to my children and our school. It's really the only tax benefit as far as educational tax benefits that my children receive. We couldn't afford to send our kids to private school if they had to raise our tuition because they were paying for the benefits that they currently receive from the program. It's something that is really important to our children. They have really grown in the private school system, and we would like to continue sending them there. And with 6 children, it would not be possible if the tuition were to have to reflect the cost of these textbooks. That is our big concern, and I would really appreciate it if you would consider that cost to the schools. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to S. Wayne Smith. Good morning again, Mr. Smith.
Good morning.
You will have 5 minutes.
Okay. I have a recommendation. I recommend that the benefits of the two-parent family and the costs and risks of divorce be covered fairly in school curricula. This could be included in one of the required classes so that all students get the same message. The curricula should develop a conscience of commitment and responsibility when it comes to bringing children into the world. If the importance of the family were covered throughout the child's education, I think it would make a difference later in life. A small reduction in the percentage of broken homes would affect many students. As you are well aware, many things negatively affect academics, including poor nutrition, sleep deprivation, poor mental health, emotional and physical abuse, poverty, and lack of parental support. The broken family plays a large part in each of these areas and is one of the most serious social problems we have. I think it is one of the root causes of poor academic performance. I know teachers are inundated with all kinds of subjects, issues, and paperwork. This would be one more thing they would have to include, but it could be incorporated into current classwork just like some schools include multiculturalism and environmentalism. I understand this subject is covered in an elective class in some schools, but it is not included in any required class. One place where this could be introduced is in 7th grade family consumer science. I asked my grandson, what do you discuss about the family in FCS? He said, we don't discuss the family, only cooking, sewing, and nutrition. I asked him, what do you do in the class? He said, so far we've made a pizza and we sewed a frog. This would be an excellent class to introduce the benefits of the intact family and the risks and costs of the broken family. The course name could be changed to Family and Consumer Science, or it could be included in other classes. But this should be discussed every year through high school. Of course, subject sensitivity must be taken into account as many students will be from a broken home. My reasons for this recommendation are as follows. Daughters of single parents without a father involved are 53% more likely to marry as teenagers, 711% more likely to have children as teenagers, and 92% more likely to get a divorce themselves. 71% of all high school dropouts come from fatherless homes, 9 times the average. 90% of all homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes, 32 times the average. 63% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes, 5 times the average. Children living with a single mother are 6 times more likely to live in poverty than are children whose parents are married. 85% of all children who show behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes, 20 times the national average. 85% of all youths in prison come from fatherless homes, 20 times the average. 70% of youths in state-operated institutions come from fatherless homes, 9 times the average. 77% of delinquents come from families that are either divorced, separated, or never married. 80% of rapists with anger problems come from fatherless homes, 14 times the norm. Boys who grow up without a father in the home are more likely to have trouble establishing appropriate sex roles and gender identity. In the long run, I think teaching the benefits of the traditional two-parent family and the costs and risks of divorce and the broken family in required curricula would instill a sense of responsibility in children, increase the percentage of intact families, reduce the percentage of out-of-wedlock births, improve academic performance, improve upward mobility, and reduce poverty and homelessness. I do believe the broken family is the elephant in the room, and schools can help to reduce the percentage of students who are disadvantaged by the broken home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next, we will move on to Susan O'Gara Benish. Good morning.
Good morning.
You will have 5 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Susan O'Gara Benish, and I am from rural Valparaiso. My husband Gary and I have 5 children who began attending Catholic school in 1993, starting with pre-K at St. John Nepomucene Grade School in Weston and graduating from Bishop Newman Junior Senior Catholic High School in Wahoo, both in Saunders County. Our 5th child is currently a junior at Bishop Newman. Thank you for this opportunity to speak in favor of the petition for a rules change with respect to the textbook loan program. The TLP is an important educational benefit for my children and other private school students in exchange for our educational property tax dollars, and the only one our family receives. Every little bit helps when it comes to financing each child's K-12 private school education. It is a daily 50-mile round trip using either a Bishop Newman school bus or our own vehicle for a total of 8,750 miles for the 175-day school year. So we do have expenses with that. I was disturbed and quite unhappy to learn that the Nebraska Department of Education is interpreting the current regulations for the TLP in such a way that it would deny private school students access to the same educational resources being given to individual public school students in the same district, contrary to the intent of the law. That is wrong and not in the best interest of the private school students of Nebraska, as traditional books are being removed in favor of digital school resources and supplemented with electronic bundles, e-books, soft-bound write-in work text subscriptions, computer programs, etc. It should not be a problem to amend the definition of textbook in order to clarify and include the above-mentioned alternative educational resources as textbooks. In an email I received back from Patricia Tim from the Wahoo School District, she wrote, "Thank you for expressing your concern regarding the textbook loan program. As a board member, I am responsible for all Nebraska students whether they attend public or private school. The intent is to broaden access to more resources as technology continues to change. Voting against the petition for a rules change will not accomplish that goal." My husband and I farm with 3 of his brothers. For our share in 2015, we paid a total of $98,000 in property taxes for farm ground in 5 counties, Saunders being one of them. According to a 2013 chart from the Legislative Research Office, 60% of our property tax dollars go to the school districts. The only benefit we ever receive is a minuscule percentage of the educational property tax dollars in the form of the textbook loan program. That's it, nothing else. The Nebraska Supreme Court has ruled that the Nebraska Constitution allows taxpayer dollars, my taxpayer dollars, to be used for textbooks or the equivalent for children attending private parochial schools, and that includes my child or my children. Failure to approve the petition for a rules change with respect to the textbook loan program is blatant discrimination against private school students and their tax-paying parents. I looked at the Nebraska Department of Education website and saw these following statements. Nebraska Department of Education mission: to lead and support the preparation of all Nebraskans for learning, earning, and living. I saw that and I thought, hey, that's kind of a catchy statement. It would make for a good billboard showcasing Nebraska. Then I saw vision: partnering for the best education for all, for life. And you know, that's a great idea. Public and private schools sharing common educational materials for the good of all Nebraska students and the state. Values: equity of access and opportunity. There you go. As simple as approving the petition for a rules change with respect to the textbook loan program. Then it has some others, and I get down to respect for individuals and individual differences. private schools and public schools can coexist in harmony when we acknowledge and embrace those differences and do not use them to provoke divisiveness. Equity of opportunities and outcomes for all Nebraska school students. The resistance and failure or refusal to work with the Nebraska Catholic Conference representatives since July 2015 on the petition for a rules change with respects to the text loan program brings me to the conclusion that the above phrases are just a bunch of feel-good words that sound politically correct but are not truthful. In my opinion, if the Nebraska... Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Benish. Next, we have Mr. I think Kevin Clark. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Kevin Clark, and this is my wife, Lori Clark. It's a pleasure to be back on this floor. I'm pretty sure I've been actually on this floor longer than all of you. My father spent his entire career in the Department of Special Ed and Ed. And as a kid, you often got asked, hey, what's your dad do? And I would say, my dad makes sure we have what we need, which was okay to a bunch of kids. But then when I said, and he makes sure we're all learning what we need to learn, didn't necessarily make you all that popular on the playground. But as a role, and as a kid looking at it, it's not much different than the current commissioner's role and his motto, every student, every day. So we're coming today as parents of 4 kids out of 5 that are in the school ages, and we use parochial schools. Had a wonderful opportunity to spend many years with Lily designing a new high school, or 2 new high schools for Lincoln, and we spent $45 million per high school to house about 2,000 students. And in that process, we designed beautiful schools with great performing arts centers. But what it did remind me, though, is we now have about 2,000 students in Pius here in Lincoln. So if at any one point we think about this as every student every day, if we took those students that we currently educate in the parochial schools out of the parochial schools back onto the public side, we would have a major tax levy issue, because we would need another brand new high school in Lincoln today just to house the Pius students, not to mention Lincoln Christian and the Lincoln Lutheran students. So the Catholic schools and the parochial schools do provide us a lot as a state board of education, because we help and they help to also educate. I think it's important to also know that combined between the two of us, we've been taxpayers for 60 years. And in the process of that, we have helped, and we believe in helping to support education as a whole. No different than my dad did, no different than the current commissioner and all of you do. Education's important, and it's important to be equal. I'd like you to consider this rule change, because I like what we receive in our Catholic education, and it's been a great school environment. And if Lily and I could have made 4 high schools, each at 1,000 students, as opposed to 2,000 students each, we would have. So we all know that the smaller quantities of students in one place in education do provide a better learning environment. So we've opted to have our students in that format, but we have a school, and I understand your budgets, and I understand trying to find pennies everywhere. And we're doing the same in our current school, trying to just balance the budget. But I don't believe the school textbook program is the place to look for additional funds. I think it's a very good program. I think it's worked well. We would like it to expand, to start to cover more than just the hard paper textbook, because things have changed a lot in 40 and 50 years. And the additional technologies are very useful. So we would encourage you to consider this change, and that it's not just for a certain segment of our school children in this state, but it's for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Clark. Next, we have Mark LaRue.
That's very good.
Was it close?
That's right on.
Oh, sure.
It's right on.
Good morning.
Oh, good morning.
You will have 5 minutes.
All right, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to come in and address the Nebraska Department of Education Board. I am here to also speak on behalf of the petition for the rules change for the textbook loan program. I am a father of 4 who all attend non-public schools. specifically Lincoln Lutheran High School and Christ Schools, where I am also the administrator. My time here in Nebraska has been relatively short. I am in my first year as administrator for Christ Schools, coming from the state of Wisconsin, which I held a superintendent's role for over 55 schools representing over 14,000 students. Now, while Nebraska may not have that number of students within our Lutheran school population, we do represent a good number of invested parents who are concerned about the education for our kids, both within the public school and within non-public schools. As I entered into my first year here at Christ Schools, we had not participated in the textbook loan program. Becoming aware of this program, I investigated a little bit further into what this would provide Christ Schools. In doing so, there were some resources that we felt that we could utilize that would enhance the learning, specifically with curriculum for our students. And so we have moved forward with participating into that program. But as I began to take a look at the list of school curriculum and resources that were provided within the Lincoln Public Schools, I found that list was very limiting and outdated, which my assumption is from years past that list has become smaller and smaller and smaller. Resources that are provided to our students not only include textbook resources, no workbook resources, but digital resources such as CDs, audio, visual resources, and film strips, which I think if you would look in many of our schools today, or specifically within Christ Schools, we very rarely use any of those outdated, what was at one time considered technologically advanced materials. We are asking that it be considered, along with our Catholic counterparts, that this rules change be considered and reviewed so that all students have the equal opportunity to the resources necessary to provide a great education. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Amber Davis. Good morning, Mrs. Davis.
Good morning.
You will have 5 minutes.
I'm Amber Davis, and my 2 children attend Christ Lutheran Schools under Mr. LaRue there. And I want to tell you a little bit about my background first. My dad was a public school administrator for over 50 years in the state. His name's Jerry Mundorf. And he worked for the ESU 8. And my brother, Jason Mundorf, is the current superintendent at Anselmo Myrna Schools. So I'd like to start off by saying that I really do believe in public education. I support public education. And I pay a lot of tax dollars towards public education. Sorry. Anyway, I grew up in Elgin, Nebraska. My husband grew up in Hebron, Nebraska. And my husband, Jason, and I obviously live here in Lincoln. And we decided long ago that we wanted our children to have an education similar to what we had growing up, where we would know the parents and families K-12. And that is certainly what I experienced up in Northeast Nebraska. It was very good for me. And my children have both been in private school, and it's been great for them. They've benefited greatly from a very small classroom. And I think they're receiving a great education where they are. That being said, I just want to say, yeah, what all they said. Please, please consider keeping the textbook loan program in effect. Please give us our small pittance that we get. I think my children deserve fair and equitable resources that all the public schools have. I don't want to take up much more of your time, but thank you, and I really respect the jobs that all of you do. This is a very difficult job, and anyway, I'd just like you to consider the petition change. Thank you.
Thank you. That is all the requests I've received. So we will take,
I'm sorry, I have a phone, but I didn't know where to turn it.
oh, we have one more.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Thank you. I won't take very long. Good morning, my name is Carrie Stratman, and thank you. I didn't follow the process exactly. I can't repeat everything that they've already said. I just would like to put in a little petition myself to please consider the textbook loan program. We have 3 children currently at St. Teresa's Catholic School. A 4th one will be starting this fall. I also speak for siblings who cannot be here. I have a sister, 2 sisters, a brother and a sister-in-law, and another sister-in-law who all have children in the Catholic school system. And we feel very strongly that schooling is important for all children and that all children should be able to receive equal opportunity here in the state. We have a wonderful state, a wonderful place to grow up. I went to public school growing up in Norris, and things are a little bit different now. We live in Lincoln and we have the opportunity to send our kids to a smaller school, which is what my husband had growing up in northeast Nebraska as well. We are taxpayers, and we would just like a little bit of that taxpayer dollars to come back to our school if possible. So we just ask and petition that you'd please consider this change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stratman. Okay. Now, I think we will take a short break. So we will try to reconvene at 10. All right? Got it? Thanks. think we will, oh, now.
Now we're beginning. Soon you'll be missing me.
Maybe we won't get started.
See how good I am? I just walked that way.
All right. Okay, the State Board of Education will reconvene, and we are moving to item 5, hearings. The State Board of Education is prepared to consider the disposition of case number 16-03, Commissioner versus Raymond LeBlanc. The board has been provided with the settlement agreement hearing, which is marked by the State Board as Exhibit 1. The notice of disposition hearing and the certified return receipts are marked as Exhibit 2. If there is no objection, these will be received. We will first hear from a representative of the petitioner and finally a representative of the respondent. Each representative will be given 10 minutes to present his or her statements. The board will not receive any additional evidence or testimony beyond that contained in Exhibits 1 and 2. Will the petitioner please come forward, be seated, and identify yourself?
Good morning, Brian Halstead, 301 Centennial Mall South, 6th floor, Lincoln, Nebraska, 68509, on behalf of the Commissioner of Education. We are here this morning in support of the settlement agreement that the respondent and the Commissioner have signed. The settlement agreement calls for a 1-year suspension of Mr. LeBlanc's certificate for his abrogation of a contract with the Millard Public Schools for the 2015-16 school year. Had we had a hearing in this case, the Commissioner would have produced evidence from the Millard Public Schools that Mr. LeBlanc had signed a contract with the school district to work at their Horizon High School in a career area. In July of last year, Mr. LeBlanc contacted Millard asking to be released from the contract because he had an opportunity to take a position at a post-secondary institution in Omaha. Millard let him know that their policy would only allow them to release him should they find a suitable replacement. Millard was unable to find a suitable replacement by the time the contract date called for his appearance. He did not appear. He has never appeared for work, and he has agreed through the settlement agreement to take the penalty the legislature has set forth in the statutes for this. So with that, we'd certainly ask you to adopt an order that suspends his certificate for a period of 1 year beginning today. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions about the settlement agreement if you have any.
Are there any questions? Thank you. Will the respondent please come forward, be seated, and identify yourself? The record will reflect that the respondent did not appear. The proceeding is now closed. The board will make a determination in this matter at a later time. Is there a motion to go in executive session?
Madam President, I move that the State Board go into executive session to deliberate and receive advice from legal counsel on contested cases and a pending petition filed under the Administrative Procedures Act.
Second. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any questions or comments? Hearing none. Denise, please call the roll.
Rachel Wise,
Yes.
Lily Larson,
Yes.
Glenn Flint,
Yes.
John Witzel.
Yes.
Molly O'Halloran. Yes. Patricia Tim,
Yes.
Maureen Nichols,
Yes.
Patrick McPherson.
Yes.
8 yes.
The State Board will now go into executive session to deliberate and receive advice from legal counsel on contested cases and a pending petition filed under the Administrative Procedures Act. All right, is there a motion to come out of executive session?
Madam President, I move that the State Board of Education return from executive session to the regular board meeting. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Denise, please call the roll.
Rachel Wise,
Yes.
Lily Larson,
Yes.
Glenn Flint,
Yes.
John Witzel.
Yes.
Molly O'Halloran.
Yes.
Patricia Tim,
Yes.
Maureen Nichols,
Yes.
Patrick McPherson.
Yes.
8 yes.
Thank you. Next, we'll move to number 7 action items. Number 7.1, state legislation board actions on legislative issues. There is no report on that item or action today. So we'll move to 7.2, which is consider action on NDE case number 16-03, Commissioner versus Raymond LeBlanc. Is there a motion? Molly?
I move in Commissioner versus Raymond LeBlanc, NDE case number 16-03, that this board approve the proposed settlement agreement which the parties agree to a 1-year suspension of respondents' teaching certificate and to adopt the final order proposed by legal counsel.
And second.
So we have a motion and second. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, Denise, please call the roll.
Patrick McPherson,
Yes.
Maureen Nichols,
Yes.
Patricia Tim,
Yes.
Molly O'Halloran,
Yes.
Rachel Wise.
Yes.
Lily Larson.
Yes.
Glenn Flint,
Yes.
John Witzel.
Yes.
8 yes.
All right. Thank you, Leslie. We will now move on to action item 7.3, and that's consider the rulemaking petition of the Nebraska Catholic Conference, NDE case 16-02, and the issue and order in accordance with NDE Rule 63. Is there a motion? Glenn?
I move that the board approve the rulemaking petition and initiate rulemaking proceedings on the requested revision to NDE Rule 4.
I second.
So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Pat?
Yes, ma'am. There's been an awful lot of back and forth on this. I received over 250 emails. And I think I'm just as much as anybody in this room understand the importance of this textbook loan program. I've got a grandson at St. Gerald's Catholic School in Omaha. I'm totally supportive of it. In some ways, the Catholic Conference and the superintendent of the Omaha Public Schools, Mr. Slattery, through their communications have made us look like the bad guys on this. When you start out a memo that everyone has sent to us that says that you are disappointed with us because we supported 1066, I think that's highly inaccurate. First of all, the Catholic Conference had some individual conferences with us prior to December. In December, Miss Rickert came to us and suggested that Rule 4 needed to be changed, and she also said she didn't see a legislative issue on this or a legislative solution on this. However, 1066 was introduced at the beginning of the year. No one on this board had any contact with Miss Rickert, the Catholic Conference, or Superintendent Slattery on this issue on 1066. No one had any contact with us on that issue. We voted on January 25th to support this, believing that Senator Christ, who happens to know is a good, solid Catholic and believes in the textbook loan program, was supporting this. We voted basically as a board to support this legislative effort, having had no contact at all from the Catholic Conference. And I did not have any contact with them until I saw the head of the Catholic Conference at an event on the 29th of January where he said that, well, this isn't a solution. So I feel offended that the Catholic Conference asked you to tell us that you were disappointed with us on this issue when in fact they failed to give us the right information as far as what they thought we should or should not do. There is not a person on this board that does not support the textbook lending program. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to vote for this motion today because the Catholic Conference wants it, and I believe that we need to continue the effort. But it also brings in some potential problems that I don't think the Catholic Conference has even looked at as far as actually implementing the rule. But I just am a little incensed at the way some of the board members were treated on this. I congratulate the Catholic Conference on getting all those folks interested, and I'm glad you're all here, because you need to be here showing your support for this, and we're going to show our support for it when we vote on it. But I do have issues with the way this was taken up, and I just wanted that to be known, so thank you.
Any other? Glenn?
Well, nothing focuses the mind like a in-basket full of emails from concerned parents. And so that caused me to dig deeply into the law and look at what was going on. I feel very comfortable with the motion that the Catholic Conference has prepared, and I guess I'm not as mad as Pat. That's my price.
I'm disappointed.
Disappointed. Well, there's plenty of disappointment all the way around, I guess.
Lily?
I do also support the textbook loan program. I probably have one of the longest connections with this of any board member because my husband was on the state board when it started, and he was on the board for 12 years. So I'm familiar with this dating back 2 years ago. It was a revolutionary move at that time. We had other big things that accomplished. That's when early childhood was put into place. That's when we had school choice was put into place. And for me, I think those have been quality accomplishments by the state board. So I just want you to know, this has been something I've been knowledgeable of for decades. And I do believe that it's always worthwhile, important to review things that have been put into place, and if there is something needed, which is reaffirmation. Thank you.
Molly?
I want to thank you for all your time this morning and in your conversations. It's wonderful to see such passion for children, for education. And in the state of Nebraska, we are every student every day, and those are not empty platitudes. I want to reassure you. And as this goes forward, my major interest is that the resources that are educational, that are given to public schools and then shared through the textbook loan program can be done in a way that is cost effective and equitable and fair. And I just hope as this goes to hearing that you do attend to the hearings in your sites and participate in those as well. Thank you.
I just want one last word here. Ms. Rickert indicated that in her testimony that the board proposed the legislation. We did not propose any legislation. And secondly, I'd like to say that of the 250 folks that sent me an email, I responded to each and every one of them. So thank you.
All right, I'm going to turn it over here to the commissioner for a few comments also here in just a second. And I think one of the pieces that's important for us to understand, and like my colleagues, I echo and appreciate all the email, the correspondence, and those folks that have joined us today. And I concur. I think all of us as board members have no intention of dismantling the textbook loan program. I think all of us believe that there's important strategies that we need to put in place to update the program in alignment with what materials are used today in a way that's legal and it's in a way around Nebraska Revised Statute 79-734. I think the commission will talk a little bit about the rulemaking process and why we have that process and what steps we now follow as a part of that process. Commissioner?
Yeah, and so assuming you adopt this motion and we have an order based the direction and approve the petition process, we'd enter into our regular rulemaking process. So not different than otherwise that we might go ahead and enter and draft a rule for hearing. We'd advertise that and set a schedule for that particular hearing. We have to give at least 30 days notice for that type of process to work as well. After we go through hearing, we'll take all sorts of feedback from the public and others that want to participate in that conversation. We'll also be able to do a bit of a dynamic of making sure legal review and all those other pieces are in place. And once that's done, it comes back to the state board to be approved if they so choose at that point in time. And then it also goes through a process where it has to be reviewed by the Attorney General. It has to be approved by the governor as well. That's the same as every rule in that we pass as a State Board of Education. And so what I would basically say, that process will take some of that time, but we'll expedite as quickly as we can to get the hearing process set up and use that as a way that we can gather input around the topic as well. And so one of my concerns, and I'll just admit that one of my concerns is that if we adopted this as it was presented, one of my concerns was that would actually slow us down. I'm absolutely committed not to slow down that process. And so what I would tell you, and I appreciate the public comment that was here as well today, because we are looking for ways to actually address these issues for students across the state of Nebraska. I have many friends and family that are in private and parochial schools across the state of Nebraska. I have 5 children of my own that attend public schools in the state of Nebraska. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate you taking time here today. I wish it wasn't quite as long as it turned out to be, but it's an important topic, and it's important that we find ways to actually accommodate that issue overall, and we'll organize that information and start moving forward with that process very soon.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I do think that's one of the challenges that we see, that in some respects that the petition and the language in the petition may actually cause the process to be slowed down a little bit. And that's, I think, a concern that I have individually. I can't speak collectively, but I believe that the goal of any rulemaking process for the department and for the board is to have language that gets through the Attorney General's office. Because if it doesn't, then it comes back and we, in essence, start all over. But we are in this process. We will use the language as the motion stated, and we will work through the process, and it hopefully will come to a quick resolution as quickly as it can, but we still have a process to follow. There are no other comments, then Denise, please call roll. The second was made by John. Glenn made the motion, John made the second.
Maureen Nichols,
Yes.
Patricia Tim,
Yes.
Patrick McPherson,
Yes.
Molly O'Halloran,
Yes.
Glenn Flint,
Yes.
John Witzel,
Yes.
Rachel Wise,
Yes.
Lily Larson.
Yes.
8 yes.
All right, thank you. We will now move on to item 4. And first item on 4 is a motion to remove agenda item 7.5 from the table.
So move.
Is there a second? Second. So we have a motion and a second to remove agenda item 7.5 from the table. Denise, please, or is there questions or comments?
Madam President, I request to abstain from the discussion and vote to avoid appearance of impropriety.
Thank you. Denise, please call the roll on removing agenda item 7.5 from the table.
Rachel Wise,
Yes.
Lily Larson,
Abstain.
Glenn Flint,
Yes.
John Witzel,
Yes.
Molly O'Halloran,
Yes.
Patricia Tim,
Yes.
Maureen Nichols,
Yes.
Patrick McPherson.
Yes.
7 yes, 1 abstain.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to item 5, which is grant the Commissioner the authority to approve a continuation grant to the Nebraska Children and Family Foundation to continue the Nurturing Healthy Behaviors Program. Is there a motion? Pat?
I would move the motion.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to grant the Commissioner authority to approve continuation grant. Any questions, comments, discussion?
Yes.
Yes.
I want to say that I was the one that was responsible for tabling this last month. This was an issue where I did not feel we had enough information, considering we had a $400,000 grant, or $400,000 to allow the Commissioner to decide to contract on. I think we all have a fiduciary duty to the citizens of the state of Nebraska to make sure when we approve these sort of things that we know what we're doing. And I didn't have enough information last month. We did get that information, and I'm appreciative of that. And I think in a lot of these large cases, or a lot of these instances where we're talking about real money, I mean, it's taxpayers' money, that we need to have more information available. And I think the commissioners kind of got my thought process on that. But I think it's important. We have a fiduciary responsibility, as I say, to deal with the taxpayers' money. And thank you very much for bringing this back to us with the information.
Thanks, Pat. Lily?
And Madam President, I repeat again that I request to abstain from the discussion.
Right. Thank you. Any other comments, discussion? Hearing none. Denise, please call the roll.
Maureen Nichols,
Yes.
Patricia Tim,
Yes.
Patrick McPherson,
Yes.
Molly O'Halloran,
Yes.
Glenn Flint,
Yes.
John Witzel.
Yes.
Rachel Wise.
Yes.
Lily Larson.
Abstain.
7 yes, 1 abstain.
Thank you. We'll now move on to item 8. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Make the motion.
Second.
Okay, I'm going with
No,
John.
whatever.
John made the motion to approve the consent
not real
agenda, and I'm
time
going with
either
Pat.
way.
He clearly had the second. Sorry, the other Pat. Pat.
I'm okay with whatever you want to do.
Any discussion or comments on the consent agenda? Hearing none. Denise, please call the roll.
Rachel Wise.
Yes.
Lily Larson.
Yes.
Glenn Flint,
Yes.
John Witzel.
Yes.
Molly O'Halloran.
Yes.
Patricia Tim,
Yes.
Maureen Nichols,
Yes.
Patrick McPherson.
Yes.
8 yes.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to item 9. And item 9 is our special presentation and discussion. And we have with us today our former speaker, Greg Adams, who is Executive Director for Accelerate Nebraska. So please come forward. And Commissioner, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
Well, I would, except, my mom told me if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
I knew something like that.
No, really a pleasure to have Greg here today to talk about some of their work. They, just so you know, Accelerate Nebraska was working actually with FSG, the same group that we are now using from a strategic planning perspective. And Greg had asked if there'd be an opportunity to present some of their findings for the state board's purposes, and I think it's just very timely given our kickoff for our work overall, and a great partner in having Greg and Accelerate, and he, I do blame him for some other statutory things that he did too. But no, thanks, Greg, for being here.
Well, thank you for the invitation, I think. I didn't realize it was going to start with a scolding, but...
Well, I'm sure I'll get the rebuttal.
Yeah, you will. You will. Well, thank you for the invitation to be here and talk with you a little bit. In the short time that we have, what I'd like to do is take you up to the 50,000-foot view of the education pipeline as we have been looking at it with Accelerate Nebraska, and just show you a few things. Most of them are somewhat highlighted in what I handed out to you. We have a lot more work to do, but I think it begins to tell a story. And just to back up and digress for a moment, Accelerate Nebraska was started in July of 2014, and I'll tell you a bit of the history of its creation. I was sitting in my office at the Capitol commiserating over whatever was going on that day on the floor, and two gentlemen came into the office. One of them, Jeff Schmid, the CEO of Mutual of Omaha Banks, and Ken Bird, the CEO of Avenue Scholars. And they presented me, we had a conversation, and to cut to the quick, Jeff's concern was that they have a number of entry-level jobs at their bank, and too many of the people that were applying couldn't pass the application exam. And right away, that was raising flags for him. It was raising flags for his HR people. And quite candidly, and I'm sure you know it, you can start at Omaha and go right across the state, and there are HR people all over the state saying, yeah, we can't find the people we need, can't find the people we need, or the skills that we need, whatever the case may be. For Ken Bird, it dug a little deeper. I'm sure you're all familiar with Avenue Scholars and what they do. At that point in time, and I don't know that the numbers have changed too dramatically, but they're heralding a 100% graduation rate with Avenue Scholars, getting all the kids through. But then as they transition, typically into Metro Community College, and at that point in time take the compass, all of a sudden now about 95% of the students find themselves in developmental education. And there's all kinds of things inherent within that you have to look at to get at the root of it. But the essence of it was, here was Bird and Schmidt saying, we need to do something, and we want to create this nonprofit, and would you have interest in heading it up? And my wish had always been, when I left the legislature, to find something in the area of education to continue to work on that frankly carried a bit of a better paycheck than the legislature. In fact, my wife had insisted on that after 8 years. You have some ground to make up, Greg. So the opportunity was there. We kicked off in July. Kathy Lang, the former Commissioner of Labor and the Director of the Department of Economic Development, joined shortly thereafter. And to be candid with you, both for Kathy and I, our professional experience told us that there were things happening at the labor end and in the education pipeline that just maybe weren't syncing right. But it wasn't going to be any good for two people to go out and say, just because I was a teacher or was in the legislature, just because I was Commissioner of Labor, we know this is a problem and we have to attack it. So we backed off from that approach and said, let's ask some people to come in who are pros at doing this research and take a look for us. We contracted with FSG, and you're familiar with those characters. I believe they might have been here yesterday. They've done good work for us, and I'm sure in examining their credentials before you brought them on board, you looked at work that they have done elsewhere. Specifically, what we asked them to do was to look at the education pipeline in Nebraska from high school into career. Now, the question's been asked numerous times, why didn't you go back further? We don't have the time, the resources, or the people. It's just that simple. That isn't to say that as we progress through all of this, we don't have to start asking the question, well, what about junior high? And what about, and what about, and what about? Right now, that is not our bailiwick. It's looking at that transition. And in so doing, and brought these folks on board, we asked them to take a look, and we also told them, take a look at the labor market. This isn't just about what's happening in the world of education, and including post-secondary. Also, tell us what's going on in the labor market. And as a sideline to that, we asked them to do a critique, a memorandum for us of the state's P20 longitudinal data system. And we've got that in our hands too, and there are suggestions for changes in that. And in time, I'm going to try to find time to sit down with the commissioner, and after we get done blacking each other's eyes, while we'll talk about what's in that, what's in there. Nebraska drags behind. We do, and I don't know that it's anyone's fault. I mean, I will take credit for that in some of the statutory and memorandum of understanding legislation that we did in 2009. But we've got to start catching up with the rest of the world on data. It answers questions for us. That being said, let me give you just kind of a 50,000-foot view of where we see things out of a line and in line, and start at the labor end. We have folks clamoring for skilled labor all across the state. That's a good thing. They're clamoring loud. They'll continue to clamor. Long after all of us are gone, my guess is, from a macro standpoint, there will be employers clamoring for labor. That is a good thing. And they're always going to want the right person to walk across this threshold. And though I believe it is the obligation of education to try to have kids, students, prepared as best they can to walk across that threshold, rarely will they be perfectly prepared when they walk across that threshold. There's always going to be work to do. And in that labor market, you will find employers that say, that's fine, we'll train them, just give us this, this, and this, the minimum. And then there will be others that have a little bit of a higher expectation that they're ready to walk right into the job and go tomorrow. A 2.9% unemployment rate, there in and of itself, raises the scream for labor. And at a lot of entry-level jobs all across the state, they're not getting the numbers of people, and that's from Western Community College area right into Omaha. They're not getting the numbers, and in many cases, not the quality when it's at 2.9. By the way, the research that we did by community college region. We took each one of the community college regions and had the FSG folks look just at that region, right across, with the same questions. And our rationale for that was, first of all, just simply logistics. Figure out a way to break it down. But also, given the diversity, the demographic and economic diversity of our state, we felt it had value to look at those community college regions because they are a geographic and economic region unto themselves. And if we were looking at the pipeline, then there are pipelines within every one of those community college regions. From the K-12 world that exists there into typically the community college, and in most cases there was at least an arm reach into the four-year world, whether it was Chadron out in the western region or beyond as we came across the state. I would tell you that generally what we found in our statewide findings became a framework for everything that we found within each region. Now, each region had some unique characteristics and some unique things happening, but they still fell within these general things. We have a lot of people employed in this state. We have a lot of underemployment in the state. And if you look at the job market, and we can dig into it, and the economic development people in the Department of Labor do that, and they try to match up skills and how many jobs are available and what's the growing industry sectors and all of that. And I really don't want to get into that with you today. But suffice to say, we have an imbalance in this labor market in Nebraska. Besides the fact we've got a 2.9% unemployment rate. Dig in a little bit further. Let me take it to the next layer. We don't have enough jobs. We have got to start creating jobs for our college graduates. We don't have enough. We just don't. Hence, every year the coordinating commission reports to the education committee about the out-migration of our educated people. Now we can sit here and we know, I mean, come on. We also know they leave for water, they leave for oceans, they leave for just to get out of Nebraska and all of those things that we've all heard. I get that. But there is also the issue of the job and at a wage rate commensurate with what they believe they ought to be able to get. And these are smart kids, they're comparing to other states as well. So we have that issue. And I'm not saying for one moment, and you will never hear me, and I want this to be very clear on the record. This isn't about, oh, well, then let's back off on the four-year degree stuff. No. This is about another world out there of creating the jobs for these folks. All right? But now, on the other hand, most of the jobs that we have available in Nebraska and projected off into the near future are jobs that don't require a four-year degree. Now, typically, not exclusively, but typically they require some education beyond high school. And I try to be very careful in the rhetoric I use because 31 years of teaching seniors, I'm guilty of saying college. And instead what we ought to be saying is education beyond high school. And that means a lot of different things. We have an imbalance there. We don't have enough people to put into those jobs. Just do not. Now let's back into the higher ed world and what's going on there. Our issues in the higher ed world are, number one, retention. And by retention, what we're talking about is when a kid matriculates, a year later, do they sign up again? Can you keep them around? And we do pretty good in Nebraska, and surprisingly, I guess it's not surprisingly, but our community colleges do particularly well. If you look at the number on the surface, you'd say, well, that's not so good. But when you weigh it up against other community college world outside of Nebraska, we do pretty good at keeping them. But I want you to note a sequence here. If we have a problem with retention, then we got to figure out why that is. And one of the possible areas is the fact we have too many kids. Remember what I said before about developmental ed. We have too many kids coming out of the K-12 world, headed into that community college world, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly, that find themselves caught in developmental education. And it's hard. There isn't a community college that won't tell you this. It's hard to keep those kids. And I'm not putting the blame on anybody, because I think even there's some stuff that's got to be done at the higher ed world to take a look at the way that they do developmental education and the way that they determine what kids are going to go in, and they're doing that. But there's work to do there. But it also then comes back to the K-12 side, and we got to start asking the question, why is that? Why are so many kids getting caught up in that? And by the way, we do good in Nebraska. In fact, on some areas, we do great in Nebraska at getting kids into the four-year world. We graduate them from high school, you know the high number. And then when they get out of high school, before they get out of high school, they take the ACT. High numbers of Nebraska kids take ACT, and it's not yet mandated. And they score average, composite average. And then we have one of the highest college going rates in the country in Nebraska. So we're moving them through into that four-year world. Actually, we're moving them into the higher ed world. But then when we split off between the 4 and the 2-year, that's where we start running into some issues that I think we have to deal with. And consider those kids that are going to the community college world, many of whom, and it's different by community college region, get caught in those developmental classes, are the very ones that we need to get through that into the welding program, into the culinary program, and into where a big chunk of our jobs are right now in Nebraska. And that generally is what things are telling us. Now, I would also tell you, and I know that every one of you in here, you've dealt with this as a body and individually, but the achievement gap in Nebraska. From one end of the state to the other, by the way. From one end of the state to the other. We've got to tackle that, because that also is, I look at this pipeline, I'm maybe a bit too, well, I see a pipeline, literally. And it's not kinked, it's not going the wrong way, but it's got some rough edges on the inside that's catching, and it needs to be aligned. And we can do this in Nebraska. It's going to take some work, some in the short, and some is going to take a bit, it's going to take a little bit longer. But we can get after this. In conclusion, and I'll take a couple questions and get out of your hair. In conclusion, when we started the research, we did create a steering committee, and I do want to point out that Commissioner Bloomstead was on that steering committee, as was Dennis Bach from the community colleges, as was Gabrielle Bannock from the university, the P16 initiative at the university, Jeff Cole with Children's Foundation, going around the table in my mind here. We also had the state chamber represented and 2 private business individuals represented in the group that were helping us guide our research, and we may still call them back into play. We're not done. We still have some work to do. I'm probably not telling you anything that you didn't know either. But for us at Accelerate, now that it's right there in front of us, we know where the work is, and it's undeniable work that has to be done. And everybody's got a share. Everybody has a share of what needs to take place. On the data side, I said it before, I won't editorialize anymore. We have got some work to do in Nebraska on finishing our P20 longitudinal data system. There are pieces of it there, and those pieces have been coming along, but it's got to be finalized. There has to be the right people in the room that have some influence and control over that data, and people have to have access to the data for all the right reasons and be qualified. I'm not saying just open the door and let anybody in, but without the data, let me give you one simple example, and I could pick on some group all the way on the pipeline. A community college. we don't think, a lot of data on developmental education in the higher ed portion of the data warehouse. We don't. When the FSG people went to work, I warned them, this is going to be one particular area that may be difficult. And they found themselves going to outside sources, federal sources, the voluntary framework for accountability that community colleges now use, but not all of our community colleges participate in it. It's by choice. But to just go to the warehouse to get the data, it's not all there. So that means you go to each community college, and they all collect it in a different way. And it gets tough. So we have some work to do. All of this is coming together. We got to finish it. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. We'll take some questions now. I'm going to go Pat and then John.
I'm somewhat of a neophyte to some educational terms. Developmental.
Right.
Is that same as, in my less euphemistic mind, remedial?
It can be. Yep.
You know, I read a study last week, I think it was, and it was really amazing the low graduation rates of those that go into either a 2-year or a 4-year program and take development or remedial education in that first year. It's like 20%. I mean, like only 20% of those people are going to graduate in 4 to 5 years. And so, you know, I think that's a terribly concerning area, Senator, that you're working on. You also mentioned here academic rigor and standards not being aligned with career and college readiness. And, you know, I know we've maybe some of us have stronger feelings about rigor of our standards or not, but are you basically saying that our standards aren't rigorous enough?
To make that blanket statement, you need to dig deeper into it. The area that is of particular concern is mathematics. And I know that you guys just revised your math standards, and so it's going to take a little time for that to filter through the system and the results of it to begin to show up. But thank you. But that is one of the areas of concern, and making sure, and this is something I know you're working on too, making sure that, and you know what, I'm going to venture to say this has always been a problem and always going to be, that higher ed's expectations and the expectations and the standards that you folks establish for the K-12 world match up as best they can. But personally, I would argue right about the time you get matched up, they adjusted them again, and away we go. But the economy adjusts too, and the world adjusts, and so that's going to happen. But one of the areas that it's really not exclusively, but primarily mathematics, where we've got to take another look and see what's happening. And I realize you guys have recently done that.
Senator, good morning, sir. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Sir, we've felt some of your frustrations and concerns out there in the field in regards when we ran our career technical education, if you will, committee. We were out in the field asking the tough questions in regards to some of the same questions and concerns you're having today. But one of the biggest issues we found out there that surprised us was lack of counseling in the schools in regards to guiding them in the right direction. Very, very potentially promising young people just did not have the guidance in which direction to go.
Yep.
And it seemed to be a lack in counseling. And also mentoring to go along the way. The Avenue Scholars by Dr. Bird, it seems like their success is based heavily on mentoring.
It is. You know, you bring up counseling, and that was not part of our research, but as we continue to look at all of those things, you start digging deeper. Instead, I'm going to go back to my former career. York High School probably had at the time maybe around 500 students in it, 9 through 12, had 2 guidance counselors. And I could just about tell you, I didn't walk in their world all the time, but what they spent most of their time with. Get kids ready for the 4-year world. Get kids ready for the 4-year world. I remember one time going to a counselor saying, this young man doesn't want to go. He is capable. He doesn't want to go. We need to find a different direction for him. You go tell his parents that. All right? And that's, but you're right. And the career counseling, there probably aren't counselors out there that don't want to do some career counseling. The problem is fitting it into the day with all the other issues that they're dealing with. But you're absolutely right.
Also, Ken Bird's, his success, would you say bottom line it is mentoring?
You know, to a great degree, that's the essence of what he does. It's wraparound services for those kids. Okay, they identify the kids that are eligible for the program, and then there's funding to help them into college. But what Avenue Scholars does is to work with those kids, whether it's to get them to school or whatever the issue is, to work to do those things, the kinds of things a guidance counselor might do or a host of other folks might do. But yes.
Okay, Glenn and Molly.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for your input. We get a lot of reports from Bert Peterson out in Hastings. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a retired actuary.
Oh, yes. I used to get a lot of letters in
there.
Yeah, you probably did.
Yeah.
All right. A lot of analysis of poverty's impact on NISA scores, and he finds that as poverty increases, NISA scores decrease. And I would take that one step farther. I think the reason poverty increases is because the family is breaking down. We had Mr. Wayne Smith talk to us this morning about stressing the importance of the family, of, you know, getting married, staying married, getting a job, keeping a job, kind of the Charles Murray thing. And I think that's a problem that's bigger than we can handle in the Department of Education. We're reaching out to partnerships, but I'd like your input on that. How can we involve our churches and other civic organizations in trying to help us build strong families?
I wish I had that answer, because when you look at the demographics of Nebraska, and our study is still doing that, the poverty isn't decreasing. It's not going away. And you look at the NISA scores, or you look at Compass scores, or what now will be AccuPlacer scores that it's used for the community college for entrance, and ACT. When you disaggregate ACT, you find that it is the free and reduced lunch, and in the area of minority where our gaps, our success gaps are at. And we've got to take that on. This is personal editorializing for a moment, all right? Kind of have my old senator hat on for just a second.
It is occasionally allowed, so that's all right.
Thank you.
Speaker.
When I hear the schools, and not just K-12, even in a higher ed world, you know, their demographics of their incoming classes, whether it's UNO, UNL, you name it, it looks different than it did 10 years ago. It's far more, I'm going to call it, far more democratized than what it was. And so they're having to make adjustments, making adjustments for the achievement gap and the poverty that comes along with that. What concerns me is, and I'm going to speak more on the K-12 side, I think we have to be careful that we don't allow poverty to become the excuse. Mm-hmm. The bucket wherein every problem we've got, we throw it over in this bucket called poverty. I asked some Avenue Scholars, not students, but the talent advisors the other day that work in some tough schools. I said, tell me about the poverty issue. And one PhD young man stood up right away and he said, poverty is not a problem. It is a warning sign of problems impending. Mm-hmm. I thought, that was interesting. He said, so if there is poverty, then you may have kids coming to school hungry. And it's that empty belly that may cause them to not do very good in math first period in the morning. If there's poverty, there may be mobility issues where this student is in this school this week and next week they're in this one, or transportation issues to get them to school. It's not poverty. Poverty is the warning sign of the things that are inherent, and those are the things that have to be attacked. And multiple reasons for those things happening.
Molly and then Lolly.
Well, I guess it's almost afternoon, but still good morning.
Yes, it is.
Still good morning. Accelerate Nebraska has done amazing work in the short time you've been working. I have two different questions. I am really interested in your information about the post-secondary graduates that can't be employed at the appropriate skill level. That really sends off warning bells, because I think we need to have both the blue collar and the white collar worlds existing in Nebraska and providing fruitful opportunities. So my question in regard to these 4-year graduates or 8-year graduates is, does the Innovation Campus do anything to build capacity and futures with the industry for these type of students?
Well, that's certainly, I believe, I don't have an answer to you. Honestly, I don't have an answer, but I think that would be one of the functions of the Innovation Campus, would be to take young people who would like to stay in Nebraska, who are generating ideas that could evolve into permanent employment for not only themselves but for others, and give them that opportunity. And I certainly think that is one of the focuses of it. But Nebraska has, we lose students, and we're going to lose students that want to go someplace else, period. But we lose students, and I suppose if you want to, you could put a price tag on every one of those persons in terms of potential revenue to the state if they stayed here, and it's put it over in the lost revenue column because they're going away.
That's a valuable human resource we're
absolutely.
losing. So I hope you do get some suggestions for that. I know Innovation Campus was one of the things you developed in your tenure in the Senate. The other one is this achievement gap. You're saying it's one of the biggest gaps nationally. No Child Left Behind's gone, but we in our state are still aggregating data. One thing our local board members are telling us is there needs to be more attention about the whole child. And I didn't know if Accelerate Nebraska is attending to those social emotional supports for these students at risk.
You know, at this point, I mean, we may at some point, but right now we're too up here just looking at what's going on to begin to deal with any of that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Lily?
As a board, we absolutely, from my point of view, agree with all of the comments that you've made and the importance of the mathematics revisions. Having been chair of those standards, we did work directly with the university. All the college systems throughout Nebraska signed off on those standards. So we're optimistic that we are putting into place the appropriate requirements in mathematics so that when students do graduate, they can move on and be successful in whatever area of post-secondary education they go. Secondly, the board, we support LB 930, which is looking at the college admission testing and what are the options there. But I truly think when we have the opportunity, when that makes it through the legislature, that selection of a test statewide is going, and this is my personal opinion, is going to give us some of the data and some of the information that will help us with improving these areas that you've been talking about.
Well, I agree with you 100%, and certainly as an organization, we support 930 as well. And you've done the research and you know the rationale behind it. One of the things that I've talked with Commissioner Bloomstead about is that, you know, let's presume that 930 passes and that you go about the work that you have to do to identify the appropriate assessment, college placement assessment, and all of that. Don't forget about the community colleges have chosen AccuPlacer. Good, bad, or indifferent, right or wrong, they've made that choice. AccuPlacer. It's a SAT product, I believe.
Right.
They've made that choice, and it is what it is. And so, as we're saying, let's use college placement in the 11th grade. What I wonder is if there also isn't a place for community college placement earlier. earlier. You know, I get a little irritated sometimes when the world wants to slap a math teacher up the side of the head saying, well, the kids don't know X, Y, and Z. Well, were they properly measured at the proper time to see if they knew X, Y, and Z to start with? And if they were, and they had time to fix it and didn't, okay. But see, there's little things like this where we've got to get aligned with ourselves and saying, if this is what we're going to ask a kid to do to get into community college and to avoid developmental or remedial education, then are we going to test for it at the day they walk in the door, or should we do some kind of assessment earlier on so we can, the math teacher can see where they're at and maybe compensate for some of those kinds of things. So yes, our standards are better aligned, and I think 930 is a good bill, and I hope that what it does for you guys is give you enough flexibility that you can look at what's going to be best.
Okay.
Oh.
And then Maureen. Pat, then Maureen.
Okay, just a couple comments. You know, I probably hired over 1,000 people in my career, not so many lately, but one of the things I always found was if they're going to represent my organization in public, they needed to know how to speak English properly. And I will tell you that was always, I turned down a lot of folks over the years because they used double negatives in interviews, and they just didn't speak the English properly. But and I appreciate the fact that your comments about not using poverty as an excuse. I do want to say something positive that might ruin my image here today, but you know, I was going to follow up on what Lily said about trying to align our math standards with post-secondary, and I think we really made an effort to do that. And I do think that there are a lot of schools, high schools across the state that are doing a really tremendous job in developing career pathways into the trades. And I know Grand Island and a lot of areas, Ralston and a lot of areas they're really doing a great job. And we gotta work to make sure we're doing an even better job and still give them those math skills. It's amazing the number of people that start in a entry-level position and now are CEOs. You know, maybe they didn't get the education that some others did, but it's amazing the opportunity. But you got to have those skills. Thank you.
You know, if I might comment just very quickly, the career pathways and the work of revisions and what the department has done, as well as local communities just saying to their schools, forget about what's going on in Lincoln. What are we going to do right here to keep Albion alive? What are we going to do over here to keep Ord alive, Hyannis alive? And those discussions are beginning to happen. And there are good pathways. In fact, York's got one of the best ones. There you go. I put in my plug. But they really do. And
I was going to point out it got better after you left.
and it did. It honestly did. But you know, one of the things
Commissioner, you're out of line there.
One of the things that you identify is that in the K-12 world, as all of us have tried diligently and successfully to prepare more and more kids for college, I wonder what would happen if you took a field trip of high schools in Nebraska and looked at their shops and see what's there. They've Did you?
Yeah, we've been all over the state.
All right, good for you.
I met large and small, and many great observations that we brought back and implemented ideas to make it better for the state. That is for sure.
Yeah.
But there's one misperception I think that a lot of people lose track of is people believe that just because that you take a trade, let's say out of high school or go into a community college, and let's say you earn a certificate in welding or whatever the case may be, that you can't go on to a four-year college.
Right.
That is such a misperception that needs to be, if you will, killed.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, Maureen, I think you had comments, and then we're gonna try to wrap
Senator,
up.
I really appreciated what you said about when you were teaching and you took the one student into the counselor and, you know, she's looking at this 4-year and you're going, this kid needs go on to community college, and, well, you be the one. as a parent of just one child, I wished that I would have had the high school counselors say that to my daughter's father and I, because we always had that paradigm of you're going on to college 4 years, and I'm still paying that bill that she didn't graduate from. But then I look, and I shared this story yesterday of the Career Pathways program at South Central Unified that I attended last week with their greenhouse ribbon cutting, and all of the different programs that they are offering, and how I so wish that my daughter would have had that opportunity. Because I believe, as a former classroom teacher, her dad and I would have said yes to that. But the thing that we've talked about, and you have shared too, is that the president of Hastings Community College and Lieutenant Foley stressed to the students in that gymnasium the importance of mathematics. Know your math before you leave, no matter what you have to do. Understand math, because you need it in every field you go into in these different career pathways. So I really appreciate the comments you said, and as I shared to one of the individuals out in the audience earlier, until you experience something, do you really understand the journey of where you have to go? And as a parent, I've experienced wishing my daughter could have had the career pathways, but she's 33 and doing great on her own.
Sure, of course.
Greg, I
Thank
want to
you.
thank you, and
Yes.
it's really hard with this group because, boy, would I have liked to have had a lot of comments, and I try to usually refrain from too many comments, but I am going to take just 1 minute, and I appreciated all the information that you brought forward and what you are doing. I think it brings forward a conversation that's so important for us to have in this state, certainly in this board, but also in the state. And in some of the areas, for example, with developmental education, I think sometimes we as board members don't realize the impact that we have, not just K-12, but through our GED programs and with adults as well.
Yep.
And one of the real challenges that we sometimes don't highlight or don't differentiate in data is when we talk about the challenges with developmental education, it's not necessarily students just transitioning from high school.
Oh, that's right.
It's many, many adults who are re-entering into education when they have been out of education for a period of time. And maybe for a few of us in this room, that if we walk back into a college algebra class, we might need a little developmental support before we're successful. Now, I can't speak for everyone in the room, but I can only speak for myself. So I think those are the conversations to really help us understand the bigger picture of these transitions that are important. It's not just the transitions K-12, but it's the transitions of individuals who are seeking to improve their opportunities in their lives by continuing education that have to start sometimes with some developmental education.
You're
so
absolutely right.
I so appreciate you bringing this forward and being here today, so thank
Good.
you.
Good. Well, thank you for the time.
And I
Appreciate
don't
it.
know that I'm going to give the commissioner opportunity for any closing remarks, because the way he has been making remarks, I'm not sure what they will be. So we just won't give him the
they're
opportunity.
that bad, huh?
Thanks,
Thank you, Greg. All right, next we will move on to item 10. Yes, we do still have a meeting going on. So item 10 is board reports, dates, and discussion items. Is there a motion to approve the meeting participation that we've had to date?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any questions or comments?
Do we sign up for this FFA?
I don't think, if you don't sign up for the FFA, I think you're fine, because there's no cost to that. It aligns with our board meeting, so I wouldn't be concerned if you didn't get signed up for the FFA. It is here, it is in town, it's at the same time we are meeting. So again, if you get signed up, that's great. But for this board action, I wouldn't be as concerned about it.
I see Thursday morning, 7:30 to 8:30 is a breakfast.
Yes,
Yeah, Molly and I
We
are
need to-
going.
in Lincoln, yeah.
Do we need a
gonna
resident?
go.
'Cause-
I emailed her.
They need a number.
Yeah, so just RSVP
Okay.
if RSVP
Okay.
if you can go.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you look at the afternoon, Glenn, they talk about if you're going to be in attendance, I think they're going to ask you to hand out an award to the administrators who are supporting The
Friday,
FFA,
Friday
yeah.
afternoon.
So if you're gonna be there, they'll wanna know that ahead of time if you plan to be there. But that's just letting Anita know.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Do we have a
Pat?
motion?
Yes, we have a motion and a second, I believe.
Well, in that case, I want to
Yes,
just
it is
add my
time.
normal
Thank you.
caveat, and for the record, and I know that we are working on this, but just for the record, this board needs a travel expense policy that, among other things, defines appropriate functions that board members may attend at NDE expense, that defines or limits the amounts that board members may expend on an annual basis, that defines appropriate levels of reimbursement for meals, mileage, lodging, registration, etc., and that defines the differences between board functions that are reimbursable by the state and constituent and non-official functions that should be paid for by the member personally or by his or her campaign account. That's the same words that I used in the last meeting for the purpose of the secretary. And I will also say that I have volunteered on the policy committee to work actively with the commissioner and his staff on this, and hope to have some way in the near future that I can quit putting this caveat or this message in the board minutes and the records. Thank you.
We are working with you on that, without a doubt, Pat. So, any other comments? If not, Denise, please call the roll.
Rachel Wise.
Yes.
Lily Larson.
Yes.
Glenn Flint.
Yes.
John Witzel.
Yes.
Molly O'Halloran.
Yes.
Patricia Tim.
Yes.
Maureen Nichols.
Yes.
Patrick McPherson.
No.
7 yes, 1 no.
All right, you also have just a copy in your information on the board travel expense report. You also have the information items for item 11. Yes, Glenn.
Could I ask for a little more on 11.2? I see it's something for our priority schools. I just wonder how that's going, what we're up to there.
Yeah, so underneath these particular contracts, obviously, we're just in the beginning phases of trying to get to a point where we're identifying the types of teams and intervention teams. This particular contract is with, I'm gonna not get the name right, Kathy Kennedy and her consulting firm. Kathy's done some work within Omaha Public Schools, is working already with Druid Hill, and it was someone that we found would be quite helpful possibly in a review at Santee and at Loup County as well. And so she's providing a little bit of that service for meshing those three schools experiences together for us. So it's been a really insightful person on our team.
Is this kind of a strategic?
Yeah, I mean, she does a very thorough job of being able to review and walk through with our team, and probably next month we'll give a pretty thorough team report of what that progress is as well. So.
And next month, we will have more time in our domain meetings. And so we will be talking a little bit more in depth about some of the AQuest and some of the status of activities that are happening. And it does look like we will not have any committee meetings on Wednesday. So I think Don Lynn will be getting the draft calendar out to you, but full day Thursday. And I believe on Friday that there won't be any study committee meetings, but we may have Friday after this meeting, the strategic planning committee to meet right after our business meeting on Friday. But Don Lynn will get the draft out to you here in the next future. Any other comments or questions? If not, we now move to item 12, adjournment. A work session will be held on Thursday, April 7th at 2 p.m. and a board meeting will be held on Friday, April 8th it should be business meeting will be held on Friday, April 8th at 9 a.m. in this room. Thanks, everybody. It's been a great meeting. The Competency-Based Study Committee is meeting in Conference Room C now. Thanks.